I became aware of the Kickstarter from Facebook promos for DynamicX. I saw some posts and I did find or see a few suspiciously staged YouTube videos from posts that were from DynamicX or connected to them, it would seem. So I think I reflect a lot of people's first impressions was that, is this thing sort of genuine? As it happens, I was one of the first 10 early adopters to get a great deal. I paid $799 plus $100 shipping, so mile up was $899 delivered to the house for a 10-degree to depth of 2 degrees of freedom seat mover, which is an absolute bargain. But even at the current rec retail, $1299 plus shipping, I still think it represents excellent value. But there's no risk without reward. Throughout, that was back in October 2025, so throughout that Kickstarter campaign, others came and went, some dropped out and just weren't prepared to back it, where people with the typical 4 actuators moving the whole rig would argue that a seat mover is not accurate. From personal experience of taking different performance street registered cars to track days, and I'm talking about road cars here, not with 4 or 6 point harnesses and full fixed back racing seats. Talking street cars with their street seats, so to speak, factory seats. But I can attest to sliding around on my non-race seats. That is, I was moving independently to the car controls. And we'll talk about cars like a Datsun 1600 510 with an FJ20 turbo, Nissan 350Z, Lexus ISF with a 5-litre V8, and a BMW M car. Indeed, I vividly recall hanging onto the steering wheel and bracing my legs and body against the centre tunnel or the door as I fought G-forces to maintain my central position in front of the controls. It was absolutely natural to be moving independently to the steering and to a less degree the pedals with the distance changing. I would point you to Race Beyond Matter's YouTube channel, David Suzuki, Boosted Media. I'll put the links below in the video description. Finally, on the first week in January, got an SMS text from a local Australian courier saying it was on its way, and on January 27th, 2026, it was delivered. The DX Winner 2, so US dollars $1,299. It's recommended, well, I see 2 lots of specs for it. Recommends up to 100 kilogram load, or that's recommended 100 kilogram load. The maximum is 140 kilograms. Now this includes your seat and other mounting hardware, would also include any transducers or butt kickers or anything else that you've got bolted to your seat. It's an all 304 stainless steel and aluminium construction. It uses a Quasi Direct-Drive technology. So what they are using is rotary actuators, and DX have said that their staff and their engineers and their ideas originate from the robotics industry. And this is instead of linear actuators. They claim that they're the first in the world to integrate this technology into a motion simulator, and it achieves a lower latency, better force feedback, better road feel, and more powerful starting and braking. The unit isn't braked when it's switched off, so they claim to keep costs down, but it means it manually needs to be locked for movement if you want to use it when it's off, as an office chair or when it's not powered up. But the fan noise is probably going to be an issue for you if you're using it all day as an office chair. They claim that they use magnetic encoders for the position sensing, significantly better than potentiometers in both performance and durability, though they are at a higher cost and they don't wear out over time. Power consumption when you're sitting in the chair is claimed to be less than 100 watts. In terms of overloading the system, this is some information I got from the engineers on their Discord. They say that the best solution to overloading is through current detection. When a stall current exceeds a certain threshold, the motor will activate protection and automatically cut off the power, making gear breakage difficult, basic avoiding hardware damage to the unit. It's implemented in the controller. Overcurrent protection is built into the firmware. They use a planetary gearbox. Quasi Direct-Drive. It combines responsive brushless direct-drive motors with 14-bit encoders with gearing for efficiency, so it saves size, weight and power consumption, but it has the benefits of lower latency and accuracy. That's what they claim from their marketing material. The gearing is low ratio with tight fit reducers. So there's claims of zero mechanical play, which is not just a claim, I can attest to that. I don't have a unit. None of the slop, for instance, and backlash in some of the other servo-driven alternative motion systems. I think we're talking about an Next Level Racing version 3, for instance, which is quite infamous for that. Claims to deliver much better motion fidelity versus traditional servo motors. And I quote here, 3 times faster than traditional servo actuators. Low noise, quicker to respond to telemetry from sim software with fewer parts to wear. End quote. Quasi Direct-Drive system captures in-game telemetry like road textures, gear shifts and impacts, delivering clear tactile feedback direct through the seat, enhancing immersion. Yeah, tick, I can attest to that. It's a 2 degrees of freedom, pitch and roll, plus or minus 10 degrees. Interesting that they've adjusted their specs on the acceleration and motion now, which are much bigger here. They'll be on screen. I forget what they are now, but I'll put them up on the screen from the website. The rotary actuators are rated at 1.2 kilowatts. It's got a 240 megahertz dual core CAN bus control. Its weight is 17 kilos or about 37.5 pounds. It uses a 48 volt low voltage power supply. And just having a look through the vents, I happen to see that it's a Meanwell 1200 watt 48 volt power supply, and that's probably where the fan noise comes into it. Dimensions in terms of centimeters, 41 centimeters by 38, and the height of it is 21. It's quite, the base itself is actually smaller than that because that first measurement takes into account the amount of the seat. Noise rated at 55 dBs, 1 year warranty. Continuous operation is limited to 4 hours, or they state 8 hours in the FAQ, mainly for safety and durability. Uses a Simhub motion at this time. DynamicX has said that they are developing their own proprietary software, Tailgate, that will be made available at no cost to all DX Winner 2 backers. The install was a bit convoluted, at least for my particular system. I've got a Trak Racer TR160. It's also elevated on feet, so I wasn't going to put the 110 kilograms of me and my seat and everything else on the small brackets as supplied. Another issue was that the width of the main 160/40 profiles didn't exactly match any of the mount variations for the little mounting brackets, which are flexible and can be adjusted at angles as well as the spacing with various holes. But these brackets that were supplied, I couldn't get them to match the width of my TR160. They've got slots designed for small bolts with nuts and washers. From the imagery on their website, it looks like these brackets are designed to stabilize it in not really profile rigs, but less kind of chunky rigs, or even just to bolt them to it and just maybe put them at 45 degrees and just use them as stabilizers on the floor and not bolt it to anything. What I was looking for was to have them, the slots in those brackets to be able to take an M816 to go into the TR80T nuts into my profile, because that's how I wanted to secure it. So anyway, a bit of drill work to enlarge them and I was all good. I ended up resting the weight of the unit and my seat haptics and me and my butt kicker, which comes to sort of around 105, 110 kilos. I put a couple of pavers on the floor and then a rubber insulation mat across the top of that just to get the height. So I was really only using these brackets just to secure it to the frame to stop any movement. So I secured them to the front and rear because I could obviously adjust my crossbars on my TR160 to exactly kind of the measurements that I needed. So yeah, it wasn't taking the weight, it was just securing it in there. Of course, the issue putting it in there was that the height, you're going to have to adjust. I was screwing around, adjusting the height of the pedals, adjusting the height of my gear shift and the steering wheel and everything else. And then you just have to also make sure that on my TR160 on the side, I've got like the bar to hold the shift and handbrake. You also have to make sure that at the full degrees of pitch and roll that the seat is not hitting anything at its maximum. They also provide 2 bits of profile to mount the seat. Again, I was hoping that the seat rails would match the width of my seat runners for the seat, but they didn't. And I see most other people are using these profiles too. I don't know why they just didn't make it a standardized width. The advantage of using the 2 bits of small profile to mount the seat is that it gives you a little bit more height, so that, for instance, I've got room to mount a butt kick a gamer directly to my seat, underneath, in between the seat and the DX Winner 2. When you turn the unit on at the wall, the fans come on, etc. That's all normal. And when I use the front switch, it does a self-centering movement. So the motors remain unengaged until you switch the unit on the system itself. So obviously the chair has to be on if you want to sit in it, because otherwise it's free to move around. It doesn't have any electronic brakes on it, but it would use minimal energy if you left it on. I've never used motion before. I've never really had a go on a motion anywhere for me. So I can't really give a comparative analysis. It's just going to be what I've liked. I've had haptics on my rig for a few years. Got a butt kicker too, and I've got a Next Level Racing HF8 seat pad. More recently, I've got Sim 3D pedal shakers on my brakes and accelerator, and that same box also drives a speed sensitive WinSim. Leading into this, before I installed it, I thought it was all about the roll. I thought it was going to be amazing to kind of have that roll into the corners, and by roll I mean the sway to roll, so more of the G-force, not leaning in from the bank of the road, but the G-force making me feel like I'm going around a corner. That was the effect I was looking for. That's what I thought it was going to be awesome, tossing me sideways in the corners left to right. But I have to say that wasn't probably quite as amazing I thought it would be. That's good, don't get me wrong, but the revelation for me was the pitch forward, or pitch from front to rear under brakes. I mean, I find that extremely immersive and fantastic. I've also added a passive seatbelt tensioner, but it's not really isn't effective with the current rear mounts. I probably need to have the mounts higher and behind the rig instead of down at the base, so that there's more linear movement to forward to pull those belts to tighten. I really like how I'm being forced forward on the brakes. I know that initial nudge in the back is physically wrong, but it's a fun and immersion, as I said before, not technically correct, and it's fantastic. I dialed down the acceleration setting for pitching me back to be a bit more subtle, but nonetheless welcome. You know, if you're in a GT3 Porsche and you flatten the accelerator, the way it kicks you back, love it, and the gear changes as well. I also enabled a general pitch setting to follow the undulation of the road, but again, only allowed 3 or 4 degrees for that. This is before I knew that the DX Winner only moved 5 degrees, not 10 out of the box. I don't really use the haptics a lot. I've got the suspension setting on, but I just there's a global setting you can turn off to get the gear shift haptics coming through without having to sort of muddy up the signal to it. I also have, as I said, got a butt kicker and a HF8 pad, so butt kicker does stuff for things like gear shifting as well. I have got excellent results for AC Evo and the original OG AC Assetto Corsa, but I will need to fine tune them for each sim. I think a little bit more for things like Assetto Corsa Rally, and I don't really know if I'm getting roll out of Assetto Corsa Rally. I have to sort of look into it a bit more. Loving it. You know, the Simhub motion scaling settings, sensitivity and motion range are critical to tune. Following the DX Winner guide, it didn't even show these, so I largely ignored them because I didn't know what I was doing in the early days, and I virtually had no roll effects. Once I got in there into the fine tuning, specifically really turning up the sensitivity, then it really came to life, and I loved it. And as I said, you need to isolate each of the settings and play around with that. But yeah, you got to make sure to twirl down the sensitivity and motion range. If you just use the settings in DX Winner, you're probably not going to get a great lot of motion out of it. After lots of solo practice laps, I finally set up a field of cars for a race. And the second big revelation for me that came weeks after owning this thing, because I do a lot of solo hot lapping when I'm doing the testing, but was the feeling of the impact from contact from other cars translated through the, I guess it's the responsive pitch, not so much the roll, the pitch and roll, but yeah, more the roll left to right. But yeah, roll. Took me by surprise and added a superb level of immersion on top of the car dynamics to, and I got a hit from sideways, and the car I get bounced sort of sideways in my seat. The settings that I use in Simhub Motion, pitch and roll, pretty self-explanatory. This is the car's aspect, pitching up and down a hill as the road, undulations on the road. Same with the roll for banking left, right, or the crown of the road. The other ones that come into it more for simulating sort of G-forces is a surge to pitch. So under braking or acceleration, you'll get under acceleration and you'll lean back, and under braking, you'll lean forward, and sway to roll, which simulates the G-forces on the body going around corners. So sway to roll, for instance, I have it rolling to the outside of a corner. So if I'm going around a left-hand corner, you can reverse this, but I have the sway to roll would lean me to the right, so that I'm sort of, the gravity is working on here, making me feel like I'm moving to the right. And for haptics, I have suspension, feedback through suspensions, suspension componentry. Something like this really comes to light when you're using a laser scan or lidar scan tracks. So I'm not sure if Assetto Corsa Rally actually puts all that telemetry through. I did my testing, a lot of this testing in Assetto Corsa, using the Targa Floria scan tracks, which are pretty accurate in terms of all of the undulations and even the resurfacing of the track and the road comes through. I don't actually have gear shift on. I just don't want to overload the all the stuff coming through the motion system, because that can be done quite effectively. If you look at global filters, there's a gear shift section, and normally I think by default it's on for dampen accelerations during gear shift, but you can leave the haptics off. If you go down to global filters and just turn that slider off for dampen acceleration during the gear shift, then you get quite a nice gear shift haptic, and it's not costing you anything in terms of busying up the signal going through the DX winner. It just comes from the I guess what it's going to be basing on is a surge to pitch. I'd been doing fine tuning, the amount of pitch and the roll limits between 5 and 10 degrees with quite small adjustments. But I did notice during testing that the chair never used the full angle, and I just assumed that the telemetry being fed wasn't extreme. But I had since, after a couple of weeks, discovered on the DynamicX Discord that the firmware currently is limited to 5 degrees maximum angle anyway. I mean, their view is that you shouldn't need more than 5 degrees for cars. Which in the main I would agree. I'd probably want to maybe try a couple more degrees on the brakes, pitching to the front, just to sort of make that more extreme and see if my passive seatbelt tensioner can sort of react a bit more. But I sort of found it a bit of waste of my time. So that any inputs above 5 degrees currently in Simhub are meaningless, because they're not translated to movement on the DX Winner 2. DynamicX has said that they will unlock all tuning parameters in subsequent firmware, and they will provide recommended presets for 3 scenarios: racing, trucking, and flight. They said that the mechanical angles of 20 degrees could actually be supported by the hardware. There has been a firmware update since I've owned it, which the only parameter they have increased is the acceleration. And I've got that installed, and for the more recent testing and the video footage in this review, I've been using that latest firmware, but the total degrees of pitch and roll is not beyond 5 degrees at this time. So it's interesting, because I didn't even know that for the first couple of weeks, just that 5 degrees was fine. I only got half. Kind of feel a little bit cheated that I only got half the degrees that I paid for, but it's coming in firmware. If you have a Assetto Corsa, I can highly recommend the Abel's Targa Floria Patreon for their new, well, not new, but for the scanned build, currently at version 0.37b. The details in this roadmap and the undulating roads make driving a pure joy with something like the DX Winner 2 or any motion system for that matter, I would imagine. This has been my go-to for tuning parameters, and I recommend when tuning haptics, be they transducers, vibration motors, fans, or even full motion systems, is use a familiar laser scanned or lidar scan track with some undulation, and disable everything except the specific setting that you're adjusting. You'll get a feel for the device's performance with that solo setting. If it's pretty busy at working at giving you feedback, and there's a lot coming through just on that one, you can adjust the sensitivity and the gain, obviously, for something like Simhub, but you also might want to consider that particular channel doesn't have the capacity to communicate more telemetry effects. It will just become muddy and overwhelm the ability of the device to give you fast and accurate feedback and cues. I really enjoyed isolating the Simhub haptic effects for suspension on the DX Winner 2. Initially, I didn't put any haptics on. Explained before how I sort of had the gearbox coming through without having to turn haptics on, because I wanted to keep it minimum. I didn't want the signal, well, not the signal, I didn't want the unit to be over the motors trying to convey everything, which just becomes a bit of a mush if you try and feed too much to it. So it was telling me that despite having only 2 degrees of freedom covering 4 axes, none were getting oversaturated, at least on that Targa Floria test run that I use. The unit initially worked with no issues, but after a firmware update and buying the Simhub license, when I tried to enable motion, the log file just gave me an error. Motion enabling output took too long. I could move the seat using the serial output test axis, so I knew the hardware was fine. It does talk to the PC, but I did get on Discord for some help, but I sold it myself, simply turned everything off at the power point. I restarted Windows. When I was doing the testing, I restarted Windows and switched USB ports and nothing fixed it, but I just turned everything off, including the PC, everything off the wall socket. I left it out that night. Woke up the next morning, turned it on, and everything worked as expected. The second issue I had is I turned the unit on at the wall and the fans came on as normal. But when I used the front switch, which normally would start at self-centering mode, it didn't do that. The motors remained unengaged. And normally at that time when you hit that front switch is when they come on and the chair's no longer free to move. That wasn't happening. The fans were on, power supply was on, but the chair was still free to move around. It connected to Simhub okay. I reloaded the firmware in case it was corrupted. I also unplugged the USB, but that didn't solve it. But how I did solve it was that I unplugged the USB to identify the USB port on the custom serial device page. This is for logging only. And when I did that, the chair moved to its normal position and tested the game, and it was all good. You got an issue with it that doesn't do the self-centering, go into the custom serial device page of Simhub, which is used for logging, and just unplug and replug your USB in there, because that solved an issue for me. So when you compare it to some of the others, now what are we, $1,299? Obviously, the big one would be the Cubic Systems QSH13, but you're looking at US dollars, $3,700. What's that? 3 times the cost. The specs. I mean, similar kind of specs. I guess they got a little bit more roll, but a little bit less pitch. Comes down to software. I guess Cubic Systems are well known for the integration of software. We can't really judge that until we have a proprietary software from DynamicX. You've got the old NLR motion simulator platform version 3. I think that's still available for $3,000 US, but I think, and that's based on a Motion Systems HS203, which is like the predecessor, I think, to the QSH13, the Polish company that makes the Cubic Systems. There's another one called the NJ Motion Compact R out of Europe, EU. That's US dollars, 3,100. I've got here to 3,600. To obviously seat mover, 2 DOF, 10 degrees. Speed's quite slow at 20 degrees a second. They're quoted on there, so I've got a 3-year warranty. But yeah, I don't really hear much about that one. And then you've got DOF M2, which is out of is it Ukraine, I think? All those, I've seen a lot of reports on reliability of the DOF things. They've got a very small, lightweight frame, so I'm not sure about high load cell pedals or direct drive motors in terms of those things. But anyway, that's US $1,500. That's pretty affordable for 2 DOF. Payload's under 100 kilograms, 700 watts. Pitch and roll is 16 degrees and 82 degrees a second speed. 24 Newton meters of torque. If you look at the torque on the DX1, I'm going to skip up before it claims 40 Newton meters rated and 120 Newton meters peak. The DX Winner 2 has performed brilliantly over the 5 weeks that I've had it set up. It was a revelation to feel braking forces and the sheer power of a GT3 race car through the pitching, delightful gear shift jolts as you slam through a sequential box, while a slower, more deliberate lurch is communicated for a sedate run through the hills in a classic H pattern as well. It has reignited my interest in flight simming, and as it requires Simhub motion for about $40 US, it's likely to simplify setups as most already run that software for dash displays, haptics and wind sims. The sheer immersion and fun factor is first class, but without the multi-$1,000 price of admission to motion systems. I believe it's the cheapest entry into motion, and yet from the revised specs on the website, it appears to surpass even the premium priced Cubic Systems seat mover, at least on paper. Install can be as simple as 10-minute, bolt on the L-shaped brackets at each corner and place it on the floor, not even in a rig. Or like I did, spend a couple of nights tooling around, getting it attached to a profile rig. It's relatively quiet and doesn't thump around, so it's suitable for apartment living or where there are nearby bedrooms. DynamicX are active on their Discord, answering questions and supporting users. It is early days, and I think the experience will only improve with firmware and software updates from an already solid foundation. Time will tell whether durability and long life of the hardware are factors. Apart from internal testing conducted, there really is no definitive answer to this. Obviously, more weight and the higher load cell brake pressure will impact this. DynamicX brake pressure is limited to 80 kilograms of brake pressure force. I think it's remarkable value for money, delivering a first-class experience, and if it wasn't for this product, I doubt I would have ever been able to sample a motion system on my rig, because the value proposition, for me at least, just didn't stack up for the multi-$1,000 actuator systems. I hope they do really well with this product, because I think it's sort of revolutionizing the motion market.